to another episode of the Hernandez story.
Hey guys.
This is episode 3, the one with the NICU story. So we're going to be going into depth on how it all happened, what happened, and our experience through the NICU.
The beginning, pretty much, how everything went in sequence so fast and so crazy. So, yeah.
So we'll give you some background information prior to the day the boys were born. Edwin's doctor had, her OB recommended that she have a high-risk doctor because of the twins. Because you have twins, you're more of a high risk for certain things. November 7th, and I was at school. I'm a teacher, so I was at school conducting my band. It was 8th period, and my phone had kept going off in my pocket and buzzing. It was my mother-in-law trying to contact me, telling me to call her right away.
So I was at my high-risk doctor appointment, and that was one of the appointments that I wanted to cancel because I was just not feeling well. I felt so sick. I felt contractions, but what I thought were Braxton Hicks at the time. And I just didn't feel well. I was like, you know what, I'll just cancel it and reschedule for the next day. I wasn't able to walk. I was very nauseous. I was just very sick. And so I went to the doctor that day, the high-risk doctor. And right away they took me in. They started doing the measuring of the babies. And the sonographer was only in there for maybe 20 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. She's like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna go get the doctor. And I said, okay, but don't you normally have to take more pictures? And she's like, yeah, we'll take them right after. And I said, okay. Didn't think much of it. I was just really tired. I was really sick. So I was just like, okay, the faster we go, the faster we get to go home. And the doctor comes in literally 5 seconds later. And they tell me all this stuff. And sorry, I might start crying, so I apologize for that. But they start telling me everything that's going on, and that I'm 2.5 centimeters dilated, and that one of the babies is he's sticking out, and that he's coming. And so my mom's there with me. I start crying. And my mom's there with me, and they tell her that she needs to call my husband because there's no way they could keep the babies there, that they're going to try their best, but it might not happen. And so that's when they wheel me into the hospital, which is right next door. And I go into labor and delivery, and they give me a bunch of shots. And then they tell me that they're going to give me a shot to help with the lung development of the babies if they do end up coming. Remember, at the time that I went to the doctor, I was 2.5 centimeters dilated.
25 weeks.
At 25 weeks and 3 days. 3.5 hours later, I was 8.5 centimeters dilated, and they couldn't stop the babies from coming. And John made it on the nick of time. I think he made it like 20-30 minutes before the babies were born, and they were wheeling us into the operating room. And that's when they told him, I guess they told you to go into the dad room and get ready and get dressed. And
they had me put on all of the sterile equipment and stuff, and the suit and everything, so I could be in the C-section with her.
And so I don't remember anything that was going on during the time that I was in the hospital. Prior to having the babies, they really knocked me out just because I was in severe pain. I was very dehydrated. I was super anemic. At one point, the doctor was like, you know what, we're going to have to give her a blood transfusion just because she's really low on iron and her blood levels. She's not really recuperating everything that she's lost. And it got really real and really scary. And I got into the operating room. they started cutting me open, and they had given me medication to. They gave me a block in my back to be able to numb me and make sure that I didn't feel anything. And when the OB was cutting into me, I felt it, and I was in severe pain, screaming. And I had enough energy to be able to lift my hand and hit the doctor as she was cutting me open. And after that, that's when John, I guess
That's when they let me in. So then I'm in the C-section room, in the operating room, and she's under a lot of anesthesia. So she's already getting knocked out, and she's screaming while they're doing the stuff. So the doctor tells the anesthesiologist to give her something else. And at this point, she completely knocks out and like falls asleep, I guess. And then so the operation's going on. They're doing the C-section. There's a curtain where I can't see anything, and I'm just standing or sitting next to her. I'm holding her hand, and I asked the anesthesiologist. I say, "Is it okay if I look on the other side of the curtain? Like, can I do that? Is that allowed?" And then he stands up from his stool. He looks over, does this, and he goes, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." So I was like, "Okay." So I look over, and I mean, if you're ever in that situation where you're in a C-section with your wife or spouse, just be cautious if you ask to look over. It's pretty interesting when you see what they're doing in there. So I'm not going to go into much more detail than that. But then a few minutes later, the babies are born, and Leo's born first. I hear just a very little cry from him, and after that I don't hear anything else. So I start kind of panicking and freaking out, and they take Leo to the first set of nurses and doctors that they got there, and they have him in the incubator already ready to go. And I see him.
Bag, right?
Yeah, they put them in a little bag to help keep the heat and all that, and to help warm them up. And he was turning not normal colors, so it was it was scary because I wasn't sure. I didn't know what was going on, and I couldn't ask questions because they were doing their thing and all of that. But I was scared that he wasn't breathing. And during that time, Manu was also born. Same thing. He gave a little cry, and I took him to his station. And same thing with the little bag. It took him a whole lot longer to get his breath going. It was probably about 5 minutes for each of them to kind of get their air going and to get the normal stuff going for their stats as far as oxygen levels and all that goes and heart rate. And at that time, I didn't know what any of that stuff, any of the equipment did, or how to read the stats and all that stuff. I just heard a bunch of beeping, a bunch of noises, and a bunch of things going on. And it's scary when you don't know what's happening and you're not sure what's going to happen. So they finally stabilized Manu and Leo. And since Leo was the first one stabilized, they were going to take him up to the NICU, and they said, we need the dad to go up. We need someone to go up with them to the NICU. So I went up the elevator with Leo. He was in his incubator. He was very tiny and very small. And then so we get up to the NICU, and the whole process is really interesting because, again, no one ever talks about this kind of stuff, so you never know what it is or what to expect. And so they take him to his room, and we had a kind of like a private room. It wasn't one of the ones that was in the unit where it's open next to people. It was a closed off room.
Basically, it's like a room where the sickest kids are in the very back.
So he has his room, and I'm waiting outside, and a bunch of nurses and doctors go in, and they're setting him up, getting him hooked up to the various things that are in there. And I remember one of the RTs was waiting outside with me. He was very reassuring, and he was like, "Hey man, it's gonna be okay, and we're gonna take really good care of your babies and all of this stuff." And it definitely calmed me down for sure, especially not knowing what's gonna happen, what this whole new world we just got thrusted into of NICU life was. It was probably a good, I want to say 10-15 minutes, and then they finally brought Manu up as well. His room was, they didn't have a shared room. It could only hold one incubator at a time. So then they put him in the room right next to Leo. So they were next to each other, but they weren't in the same room with each other. Same thing, they got them assembled and everything. And just sitting in the room, looking at our new baby that had just been born, and they were so tiny and were on machines hooked up with tubes and IVs and everything hooked up to them. It's definitely a sight, and it makes you grateful for the fact that they are alive and that they are doing their best to live. And it definitely,
They're miracles.
Yeah.
They made it through so much. You look at them now, and it's crazy.
Leo was 1 pound 8 ounces, and Manu was 1 pound 11 ounces. They were really small. Of course, a bag of rice. Our wedding bands fit all the way up into their arm, and we weren't able to hold them. I think Manu was the longest to be able to hold. I think it took us almost 2 months,
a month and a half.
to hold him. And Leo, we held him, a month after he was born?
It's like
3 weeks after he was born. We didn't have that experience of getting out of the hospital and bringing our babies home. When I got released from the hospital, it was
6 days after.
I had to stay a little longer, just because of all the craziness and make sure that I was okay. But when we left the hospital, it was so hard for me. It was so hard. I was walking out with John, and at the same time, there was another lady walking out with her babies, and it was really hard. It was just,
It's not the way that you picture your first babies being born. But, life throws you what it throws you. And this is our story on that. We didn't think the babies were coming at 25 weeks, but they did. And the scariest part was the unknown. Especially being first-time parents, it never crossed my mind that your babies can come that early and what can happen when they do, if they will survive. If they do survive, then what does that mean for them medically, health-wise, and all that stuff moving forward? It was all very...
we didn't even know what NICU was prior to the boys. Our babies were considered micro preemies, and so their diaper sizes were crazy small. That was our beginning stages of NICU, and we just want to be that word, like, to explain that other side, because I feel like parents are so scared to explain or ask questions, and we were so scared to ask the nurses questions, and we were so lucky to have these amazing nurses and doctors that took care of our babies. We're gonna, I guess, have more videos of this stuff, because this is only part one. There's plenty more stories out there.
And it's like she said, the beginning stages, the overview of it. Then we'll go into more depth on the progression of the boys and all that good stuff.
So, what was it? So, from our family to yours,
Stay safe.
and be blessed.
Bye.
Bye.